Hey guys, in this video I'll be counting down the top 10 greatest bodybuilding shows of all time. Now, obviously this list is inherently subjective, it's based on my own opinions, but I did consider several key factors, things like stage design, legacy, lineup depth, the level of competition, how memorable or historic the outcome was, and just the overall legendary feel of the show. Some of these events were stacked with all-time great names, while others were turning points for the sport, and a few were simply iconic because of one unforgettable performance. Either way, these are shows I believe that stood above the rest, but do let me know if there are any others that you would add. Now, before we do get into this video, I want to give a quick shout out to my partner, Old School Labs. If you guys are interested in high quality supplements, you can use my code JakeUltimate or check out the link in the description below. With that all being said, if you guys do enjoy these videos, a like and sub would be awesome. And without any further ado, let's get into this video. Alright, starting off this list at number 10, we have the 2024 Prague Pro, and honestly, this show was great, possibly one of the best in recent times. First off, you had Chris Bumstead, the face of classic physique, who had dominated the division for 6 straight Olympias, make the leap into the open division. And this wasn't some sort of quiet test run at a small regional show, this was a full-on open debut, and it completely shocked the bodybuilding world. The hype was already massive going into the show, but what made it even more emotional was the fact that this ended up being Chris Bumstead's final competitive appearance before retiring, and this was definitely a way to go out. Seeing him stand on an open stage holding his own with that trademark flow, structure, and polish was one of those surreal moments where it felt like you were watching history unfold. He had really nothing left to prove, and yet he gave the fans one more thing they never expected to see. That alone elevated the entire show. This wasn't the only spotlight though, the lineup was also pretty quietly stacked. You had Sean Clarita, a two-time 212 Mr. Olympia, once again jumping into the open class and holding his own. His compact, dense physique and ridiculous condition made him a true standout, especially when standing next to guys nearly twice his size. And then there was Martin Fitzwater coming off a top 4 finish at the Olympia, a guy with tons of momentum, presence, and a look that's getting more and more refined each time he competes. He looked great and obviously won, and you could also feel that hunger in his performance. The lighting was on point, the venue setup was clean, and the crowd was seriously alive, like not just polite clapping, but fully invested in every single call out. It had that big fight energy, which is rare, outside of the Olympia or the top 3 big shows. There was tension, excitement, surprise, everything you would really want in a bodybuilding show. What makes the 2024 Prague Pro so special is that it wasn't just a well-run contest with great physiques, but it felt historic. Between Chris Bumstead's open debut and farewell, Clarita's continued push across the divisions, and Martin being one of the few competitors to ever defeat Chris Bumstead, this show just had legacy-level moments baked right into it. And even though it's still pretty fresh in my mind and probably yours as well, it has already earned its place among the greats, at least in my opinion, which is why it starts off our list at number 10. Coming in at number 9, we have one of the most legendary post-Olympia battles of all time, the 1996 German Grand Prix. If you're a fan of Dorian Yates' era, this show is an absolute time capsule, a pure snapshot of bodybuilding when sheer brutality met elite condition, and the European Grand Prix circuit was the place to be to see these freaks at their finest. Now, we all know Dorian's 1996 Olympia win wasn't the most dominant of his reign, but this was a peak Dorian Yates in arguably even better lighting, with that grainy, granite-hard condition he was famous for. And the video footage gives us some of the most freaky, most legendary visuals of this era. The really simple stage design also absolutely enhanced the physiques, and every shot looked like it belonged in a bodybuilding history book or magazine. Moreover, the lineup was not just deep, it was ridiculous. Right behind Dorian was Nasser Al-Somebody, who had one of his best seasons ever, bringing fullness, shape, and enough mass to make Dorian really work for that win. Then you had Kevin Levrone in third, arguably still improving year after year, and Paul Dillette in fourth, who was really downright a monster. and rounding out the top 5, none other than a young Ronnie Coleman, still flying under the radar but already showing the shape and the structure that would eventually make him an 8-time Mr. Olympia. Further down the lineup, you still had top-tier talent like Vince Taylor, Chris Cormier, Jean-Pierre Fuchs, and Charles Claremont. Seriously, this was the epitome of 90s bodybuilding. Every pose felt like a dream matchup, and there was zero filler in the callouts. Everyone really came to win. Now, what really sets this show apart is the combination of elite talent, dramatic rivalries, perfect lighting, and that raw, gritty European show energy. It had the vibe of an underground classic, but with a lineup worthy of the Olympia stage. Dorian was tested by both Nasser and Kevin, and even though he still came out on top, it didn't really feel like a walk in the park. Now, the reason why the 1996 German Grand Prix earns the number 9 spot is because it wasn't just a great show, it was a visual and competitive masterclass from an era that many still consider the golden age of freaky physiques. Alright, number 8 on the list is one that hits right in the heart of the greatest rivalry of all time, the 2005 Mr. Olympia. Now, if you saw my bodybuilding rivalries tier list ranking, you know that I placed Ronnie Coleman versus Jay Cutler at the S+ tier, and for good reason. Their back and forth over the years was absolutely electric, but 2005, this was the peak of the tension. It was the perfect combination of Ronnie's dominance and Jay's hunger, colliding on the same stage, both in great shape and ready to battle. Ronnie was coming in hot, gunning for his 8th Sandow, a record that would tie him with Lee Haney for the most Mr. Olympia titles in history. And even though he still brought that classic size, graininess, and freak factor, you could still tell that Jay was catching up and fast. This was not the 2001 version of Jay that had caught people off guard. This was a seasoned, laser-focused Jay Cutler, and he came in with a look that legitimately pushed Ronnie to his limit. And that's what made the show so good. It was not just another dominant Ronnie win, this one felt earned. Jay was right there, inching closer, improving every year, and the crowd knew it. Every callout had real suspense. You could feel that maybe, just maybe, the throne was about to be taken. Of course, Ronnie still pulled it off and claimed his 8th and final Mr. Olympia title, cementing his place in history as the king. But the writing was on the wall. This was the last time we saw Ronnie at his peak, and the last time he actually held off Jay Cutler. It made what happened in 2006 even more epic, but this was the chapter where the torch almost passed, and that near upset energy made it unforgettable. For those reasons, the 2005 Mr. Olympia takes the number 8 spot on this list. It was not just about who won, it was about two legends colliding at the peak of their rivalry, both looking phenomenal, both fighting tooth and nail, and the sport thriving because of it. Now, I will say that really any of their rivalries from 2001 to 2005 could have taken this place, and I think 2003 was a pretty good contender for that because of Ronnie looking so crazy, but in my opinion, I took 2005 as being, the most influential out of all of their rivalries. Coming in at number 7 is the 1984 Mr. Olympia, a show that truly captured bodybuilding at a crossroads. This wasn't just another contest, it was a meeting of the past, the future, and the present, all under one roof on one legendary night. Let's start with the setting, New York City at the Madison Square Garden, the birthplace of the original Olympias. For longtime fans, this was sacred ground, and on that stage stood 3 former Mr. Olympia winners, legends from 3 different eras. Chris Dickerson, Samir Banu, and most importantly Sergio Oliva, the myth himself, making a comeback after 12 years away from the Olympia stage. When Sergio walked out for prejudging wearing competitor number 1, the crowd went absolutely insane. Sure, he was 43 years old and way past his prime, but it didn't matter, the moment was awe-inspiring. Fans had read about him, seen him in black and white magazine photos, but now they were watching a living legend strike the iconic victory pose in full color live in front of them. It was pure nostalgia and reverence all rolled into one. While Sergio represented the past, the future of bodybuilding had really just arrived in the form of 24-year-old Lee Haney. Haney had placed 3rd the year before, but in 1984 he returned with one of the greatest one-year transformations that the sport had ever seen. He stepped on stage at 243 pounds, all on an X-frame with wide lats, full chest, and tight waist, and a back that looked like it was carved out of stone. This was the dawn of a new era, mass with class, and Haney absolutely blew everyone away. And it wasn't just Haney, the lineup was stacked with guys like Mohamed Makaway, Bob Paris, Albert Beckles, and Tom Platz, each with their own unique strengths. There was something for every fan in that top 10. You had aesthetics, density, freaky legs, razor-sharp condition. It was a full buffet, you could say, of bodybuilding style. Now, what really made this show special was the symbolism of it all. It was the official changing of the guard. The fans came to honor the old one with Oliva, Platz, Dickerson, but they left talking about Haney. This wasn't just a win, it was the start of a dynasty, the first of what would become 8 Sandow trophies for Haney. This is why the 1984 Olympia lands at the number 7 spot. It was more than just a competition, it was a true moment, a time capsule of where the sport had been, and a clear signal of where it was going. Moving to number 6 on the list, we've got the 2009 Mr. Olympia, otherwise known as the comeback of Jay Cutler. For some background info, in 2008, Jay lost his title to Dexter Jackson, and honestly, people were starting to wonder if he was done. He had already won 2 Sandows, sure, but his physique seemed to be slipping, and there were whispers that he might not be able to get back to the top. And then 2009 happened. Jay didn't just return, he came back with a physique that looked rebuilt from the ground up. Bigger, fuller, tighter, and most importantly, hungrier. From the moment he stepped on stage, it was clear that this was a different Cutler. He looked like a tank with perfect polish, and he hit poses with confidence like he knew exactly what he came there to do. And of course, you cannot talk about this show without mentioning the legendary quad stomp, probably one of the most iconic moments in bodybuilding history. That one pose symbolized the entire weekend for Jay, that he was back and that he was taking the crown with authority and dominance. But this was not just the Jay Cutler show, the lineup was also pretty deep. Branch Warren came in with the best package of his career and shocked everyone by placing second. Dexter, the defending champion, had a very strong showing and arguably was at his all-time best, but still finished third. Then you had Kai Green, already showing flashes of his future greatness in fourth, and a young Phil Heath just beginning his climb to superstardom in fifth. Even Victor Martinez was still in the mix, rounding out the top 6. Now, what makes the 2009 Olympia so legendary is not just that Jay won, it's how he won. This was the first and only time in history that a former Mr. Olympia lost the title and won it again, and that had really just never been done before. It completely flipped the usual decline narrative on its head, and it gave bodybuilding fans something rare, a real comeback story, right at the top of the sport. So for this historic redemption arc, the iconic stage moment, and a top-tier lineup that marked a turning point for several careers, the 2009 Mr. Olympia absolutely deserves number 6 on this list. At number 5, we've got a true underground classic, the 1997 Finnish Grand Prix held in Helsinki, Finland, and if you've never seen this show, you are seriously missing out on one of the most underrated yet absolutely stacked contests in bodybuilding history. First off, let's talk about the lineup, because this show quietly delivered one of the strongest fields of pros ever assembled in Europe. You had Chris Cormier, a rising Ronnie Coleman, Nasser El Sombati, Paul Dillette, Vince Taylor, Milos Sarcev, Lee Priest, and even Finnish legend Marko Savolainen, all in one show. That is literally an all-star lineup of the 90s. And then to top it all off, you had Kevin Levrone, who showed up in what many fans still consider to be his best look outside of the Olympia, maybe even better than any of his Olympia showings of all time. Full, round, dry, and posing with insane confidence, Kevin was just on another level that night. But it wasn't necessarily a slam dunk, as Chris Cormier came in absolutely shredded and arguably could have won, and Ronnie Coleman, who was also on the rise at this point and also may have been slightly overlooked, took third place. and you could already see flashes of the future legend in his physique, crazy structure, thick muscle, and potential just waiting to take off. Then you had Nasser El-Sonbaty in fourth, still massive, still conditioned, and clearly not happy with his placing. He thought he maybe should have placed a little higher, and honestly, depending on what you value, he had a case. That's just how good the top tier of this lineup was. Every single placing was debatable, and every guy brought something different to the table. And let's not forget about the crowd. The Finnish fans came out strong, especially for Marko Savolainen, who placed 7th but got one of the loudest reactions that night. That local support mixed with the raw intensity of the athletes gave the show an incredible atmosphere. It wasn't nearly as rowdy as an Olympia, but still very high stakes. All in all, this wasn't just a sideshow in between Olympias, this was a real clash of legends, with everyone pushing for a high placing, future momentum, or in some cases redemption. The lighting was very solid, the stage presence was elite, and the whole vibe felt like a celebration of the best bodybuilding had to offer in the late 90s. That's why I have the 1997 Finnish Grand Prix at number 5 on this list. It's one of those rare shows where the entire top 10 is extremely memorable outside of the Olympia. The competition was also razor tight, and you had multiple legends delivering some of their absolute best looks. At number 4, we have the 1980 Mr. Olympia, probably the most controversial show in bodybuilding history. This was the year that Arnold Schwarzenegger shocked everyone by making a last-minute comeback after a 5-year retirement with no prior announcements, barely any prep time, and minimal notice to the competitors. The plan was originally for him to be there as a commentator, and instead he signed up the day before the contest and ended up winning. Now, the lineup was no joke. You had Mike Mentzer, Frank Zane, Chris Dickerson, Boyer Coe, Tom Platz, all active, very high-level competitors, all in pretty solid shape. Zane was the reigning champion, 3-time Mr. Olympia for that matter, and Mentzer had just won the Mr. Universe the year prior with a perfect score. Meanwhile, Arnold, though still very charismatic, was clearly not at his best. His legs were down in size, his midsection was definitely softer, and overall he looked maybe 80% to 90% of his prime. It is important to mention that none of the other competitors were at their best either, with nobody standing out, including Arnold. Still, when it was all said and done, Arnold was awarded the first place finish, and the reaction was instant chaos. The crowd booed the decision. Some competitors like Mike Mentzer were so upset that they retired from the sport completely. Others like Zane and Boyer Coe distanced themselves from the IFBB, and even CBS, who was planning to broadcast the contest, pulled out after seeing the final result and refused to air the footage. There were accusations of politics and favoritism. 4 of the 7 judges were reportedly close friends or past supporters of Arnold, and then you had the contest organizer Paul Graham, who was also one of his longtime friends. And with no real transparency in the judging back then, it was hard to say anything other than that the system felt rigged. The fallout from this event was also huge. It damaged the IFBB's credibility, fractured relationships between athletes and the promoters, and forced major changes to the judging procedures for future Olympias. It also left a permanent asterisk next to Arnold's 7th Olympia win, and even decades later, it's still very much debated. Some say his charisma carried him, and others say he never should have been in that top 5. Whether you think this was a travesty or a flex of legendary status, there's no denying the show's impact. It changed the perception of bodybuilding forever, put judging under a microscope, and reminded everyone that popularity in politics can sometimes outweigh pure physique and, judging criteria. For those reasons, I'd have the 1980 Mr. Olympia at number 4. It may not have been the most fair, but it was certainly unforgettable. Taking the number 3 spot is the 1993 Mr. Olympia, and this one is all about contrast, or as I like to call it, the duality of man in Dorian Yates versus Flex Wheeler. This show gave us 2 completely different versions of what bodybuilding could be. On one side, you had Dorian Yates, the reigning champ, bringing arguably the most freaky, grainy, granite-hard physique the sport had ever seen. This was peak Dorian, 257 pounds of dense, detailed muscle, with that famous gray, dry look that made him look like a walking anatomy chart. On the other side, you had a rising star Flex Wheeler making his Olympia debut and looking like he was carved out of marble. Wide shoulders, tiny waist, flowing lines, the absolute epitome of aesthetic perfection. And the wild part is that both of these guys were arguably at their career best here. Dorian brought pure dominance, Flex brought flawless presentation. It was a true clash of styles, brutality versus elegance, mass versus shape, and both really delivered. Flex's second place finish was really as good as any debut gets, and honestly, some people still debate whether he should have won. But beyond the top two, this show was really stacked. You had Sean Ray coming in third place looking razor sharp, Lee Labrada bringing his usual symmetry and polish in fourth, you had Kevin Levrone in fifth, Paul Dillette right behind him, and even guys like Charles Claremont, Andreas Munzer, the famous Lou Ferrigno, and Milos Sarcev filling out that top 11. This was a lineup where almost everyone brought something unique, and they all pushed each other as well. Now, the 1993 Olympia was also a turning point in bodybuilding. It solidified Dorian as a dominant force, as well as the new standard, and introduced Flex as the next great rival. It showed that bodybuilding could go in two very different directions, and fans were split. Some loved the mass and condition that Dorian brought, and others wanted the flowing aesthetics that Flex represented. That's why the 1993 Mr. Olympia ranks third on the list. It was more than just a great show, it was a defining moment where two of the greatest physiques ever went head to head both at their best and gave us one of the most iconic contrasts that the sport has ever seen. At number 2, we have what many fans still consider the most stacked non-Olympia show of all time, the 1999 British Grand Prix. This lineup was just unreal. You had Ronnie Coleman fresh off his second Mr. Olympia win, still in peak form and looking even more dangerous than he had in Vegas. And right behind him was Flex Wheeler in what might have been his best ever version, full, dry aesthetic and completely focused on winning. Then there was Kevin Levrone, who brought one of his best looks ever and still placed only third. That's just how deep the lineup was. Dexter Jackson was also in the mix as well, already showing signs of the Mr. Olympia champion that he would eventually become, and Milos Sarcev showed up in ridiculous condition, placing a well-deserved fifth and beating some absolute giants. Then you had Nasser El-Sambadi, Marcus Rule, and even a young Gustavo Badell, who were all pushed outside of the top 5. Just let that sink in. These are guys who were top Olympia contenders, and they were still defeated by the sheer quality of the lineup. And then there was obviously the lighting, crisp, dramatic, and absolutely perfect for showing off muscle detail. The footage from the show has become legendary because of how well it captured the physiques. Every shot looked like it was ripped out of a cartoon or some sort of fiction. Add in the crowd energy and the post-Olympia European Tour atmosphere, and it just felt like a celebration of high-level competing. Personally, what makes this show stand out is that everyone brought their A game. No one was off, no one coasted by. The top 6, excluding Ronnie, could have placed in really any order, and fans would have still argued. And the fact that a show this good was not the Olympia, rather that it happened on a Grand Prix stage, makes it all the more special. That's why the 1999 British Grand Prix earns number 2 on this list. It was peak 90s bodybuilding, mass aesthetics, freak factor, and elite level competition all on one stage. Just a perfect storm of talent, presentation, as well as intensity. Finally, taking the number 1 spot, the crown jewel of bodybuilding history is the 1999 Mr. Olympia. This show had everything. Lineup depth, insane. Presentation, flawless. Legacy, untouchable. If there is one Olympia that really feels like the peak of the sport, this has got to be it. Let's start with the basics. Ronnie Coleman came in to defend his title after shocking the world in 1998, and somehow he managed to top that. Ronnie looked downright unbeatable, massive, dry, and detailed from every angle, and the judges definitely agreed. He won the show unanimously, a clean sweep that sealed the deal. it only further reinforced that this was Ronnie's era. Now, the rest of the lineup was also crazy. You had Flex Wheeler taking second, and honestly, he looked incredible, arguably better than 1998, full, refined, and confident, but it just was not enough to stop Prime Ronnie. Then you had Chris Cormier placing third, another very solid and well-deserved placing, and showed that he was one of the most well-rounded competitors of that era. Then you had Kevin Levrone, Sean Ray, Nasser El Sambadi, Paul Dillette, Lee Priest, Dexter Jackson, and Milo Sarcev all making up that top 10, and this was no off year for any of them. They all showed up in great or excellent form, and honestly, you could shuffle the entire middle of this lineup, or even just have a show without the top 3, and still have a very elite Olympia roster. And beyond the physiques, this show had atmosphere. It was the first Mr. Olympia, I think at least, ever held in Las Vegas, which gave it a fresh, very lively energy. The lighting was on point, the camera work was cinematic, and the entire thing felt like a legit sporting event, not just a niche contest. This was the moment where bodybuilding felt big, like it had finally matured as a global sport with real stakes, real drama, and the best competitors in the world bringing their absolute best. It had a sense of occasion, and the visual presentation still holds up till this day. That's why the 1999 Mr. Olympia takes the #1 spot on this list. It wasn't just the best lineup, it was the total package. A dominant champion, elite runner-ups, deep competition, iconic presentation, and a lasting legacy that fans still talk about 25 years later. This was bodybuilding at its absolute peak. Anyways, guys, that about does it for this top 10. I'm sure there are plenty of shows that could have been featured in this video, so please let me know in the comments down below if there are any you would add. That being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you all in the next one. Thanks for watching.